He didn't just draw fast, he left bodies faster. In a land crawling with outlaws, lawmen, and shootists itching to prove themselves, Dallas Stoudenmire stood out as a deadly force of justice. With a towering frame, a reputation for fearless action, and one of the quickest draws in the West, Stoudenmire cemented his legend in a matter of seconds. 4 dead in 5 seconds, to be exact. What led to that infamous shootout in El Paso? And was Stoudenmire really the fastest gunslinger the frontier ever saw? Saddle up, because this is one Old West tale you won't want to miss. If you love gritty frontier legends, wild shootouts, and the real stories behind Old West icons, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a shot from our channel. Dallas Stoudenmire was a notable figure of the American Old West, remembered both for his time as a lawman and for his involvement in one of the most talked about incidents of frontier justice. Though his career was relatively short, he made a lasting impression in the rough and tumble town of El Paso, Texas. He is best known for a brief but dramatic encounter in 1881 that would later be referred to as the 4 dead in 5 seconds gunfight. The confrontation unfolded quickly and left a powerful mark on the public imagination, earning Stoudenmire a reputation for swift and decisive action. Before becoming a lawman, Stoudenmire served as a Confederate soldier during the Civil War and later worked for the Texas Rangers. These experiences shaped his approach to law enforcement in a region where legal authority was often unclear, and towns were frequently caught between order and chaos. Stoudenmire's reputation wasn't built on recklessness, but rather on his readiness to act under pressure. His firm approach to upholding the law in El Paso won him both admiration and criticism. While some saw him as a much-needed symbol of strength, others viewed him as unpredictable and overly aggressive. Despite his polarizing presence, there's no denying that Dallas Stoudenmire became an enduring symbol of the complicated role of lawmen in the Old West, a place where justice often depended as much on personal resolve as it did on official authority. Early life. Dallas Stoudenmire was born in the rural community of Aberfoyle, located in Bullock County, Alabama. He came from a large Southern family and was one of 9 children born to Lewis and Elizabeth Stoudenmire. Like many boys raised in the post-frontier South, he grew up amid the shifting cultural landscape of a nation on the brink of civil conflict. When the American Civil War broke out in 1861, Stoudenmire, still only a teenager, was eager to serve. Despite being just 15 years old, he managed to enlist in the Confederate Army. However, due to his young age, his superiors eventually discovered the truth and discharged him from service. That didn't stop him. With persistence, he re-enlisted on 2 separate occasions and eventually gained acceptance into Company F of the 45th Alabama Infantry Regiment as a private. By the end of the war, he had grown into a strikingly tall figure, reportedly standing 6 feet 4 inches. Surviving records suggest he faced many hardships during the conflict, including physical injuries that would follow him for the rest of his life. He was said to carry remnants of the war within him, both figuratively and literally, as he lived with 2 embedded bullets for many years after the fighting had ended. Following the Confederate surrender, like many former soldiers, Stoudenmire sought a new beginning in the American West. He eventually made his way to Texas, where he spent at least 3 years with the Texas Rangers. This elite law enforcement group, though often controversial, played a key role in policing the sparsely populated frontier. Stoudenmire's time with them likely refined both his instincts and his understanding of frontier justice. Outside of his professional life, Stoudenmire was considered by many to be a charismatic figure. He was tall, confident, and known for his polished appearance. Accounts describe him as a man who dressed with style and treated women with courtesy, an image that contributed to his strong presence in public settings. However, he also had a more unpredictable side. When under the influence of alcohol, his demeanor could change dramatically. His temper was famously short, and he wasn't known for backing down from confrontation. Another of his unique traits was his ambidextrous shooting ability. He was known for carrying 2 firearms, and it was said he could use either hand with equal precision, a skill that likely added to his mystique. From around 1874 to 1878, Stoudenmire seemed to vanish from official records. During this time, he may have lived in Mexico, a common destination for many Americans seeking either opportunity or escape. His ability to speak Spanish fluently supported the idea that he had spent time immersed in Hispanic culture. During this quieter chapter of his life, he worked in a variety of trades, including as a carpenter, sheep farmer, wheelwright, merchant, and business owner, demonstrating a level of versatility and adaptability that was necessary for survival on the 19th century frontier. Stoudenmire's early life reflects many of the contradictions of the Old West: a desire for honor, a hunger for reinvention, and a complicated balance between civility and chaos. These traits would all play a role in the larger-than-life legend he would later become: career as a lawman. After several quiet years, Dallas Stoudenmire reappeared on the public record when he accepted the position of town marshal in Socorro, New Mexico. It was a small but significant step back into public service, offering him a foothold in the world of law enforcement during a time when many frontier towns were struggling to maintain order. While working in Socorro, Stoudenmire was contacted by his brother-in-law, Stanley Doc Cummings, who lived in nearby El Paso, Texas. Cummings encouraged him to apply for a new position as town marshal in El Paso, a city that had developed a reputation for disorder and lawlessness. The local government was looking for someone from outside the community, preferably a figure with a tough image and a no-nonsense attitude, to bring stability to the town. At the time, El Paso was still a growing frontier settlement, newly energized by railroad expansion and increased trade. But with this growth came a wave of instability. Gunmen, gamblers, cattlemen, and drifters filled the streets, and the city government was desperate to restore public confidence. Stoudenmire, with his experience and imposing presence, seemed like a strong fit for the role. He arrived in El Paso by stagecoach and was soon appointed town marshal. His official start date was Monday, April 11, 1881. Notably, he became the sixth person to serve in that role within just 8 months, an indication of how difficult the job had become. Turnover was high, and few men lasted long in the position. The city hoped Stoudenmire would finally bring much-needed continuity and structure. One of his first tasks as marshal was to take over control of the town jail. The keys were still in the possession of Deputy Marshal Bill Johnson, who had developed a reputation for excessive drinking and unreliability. City officials viewed Johnson as a liability, and they instructed Stoudenmire to retrieve the keys as part of his efforts to clean up the department. According to multiple accounts, when Stoudenmire approached Johnson, who was allegedly intoxicated at the time, he asked for the keys in a firm but civil manner. Johnson reportedly muttered something about needing to go home and sort through them, unsure which keys were his and which belonged to the city. Stoudenmire, eager to assert his authority and eliminate any confusion, insisted on receiving the keys immediately. What followed became a much-discussed incident in El Paso. Witnesses claimed that the new marshal, frustrated by Johnson's reluctance, physically intervened and retrieved the keys himself. The encounter ended with Johnson feeling deeply embarrassed, especially as it unfolded in public. Though no serious harm was done, the incident signaled a shift in leadership. El Paso now had a lawman who wouldn't tolerate delays, excuses, or lapses in responsibility. This early episode defined the tone of Stoudenmire's administration. He quickly established that he intended to take his duties seriously and expected others around him to do the same. For a city mired in dysfunction, his arrival marked the beginning of a more disciplined, if sometimes controversial, approach to law enforcement: the 4 dead in 5 seconds gunfight. On Thursday, April 14, 1881, just 3 days after Dallas Stoudenmire took on his duties as town marshal, El Paso became the scene of one of the most widely reported law enforcement incidents in Old West history. The event, later dubbed the 4 Dead in 5 Seconds affair, would earn national attention and place both the town and its new marshal firmly in the public eye. News of the incident spread rapidly, appearing in major newspapers across the country, from San Francisco to New York City. What had begun as a search for missing cattle and 2 young cowboys quickly evolved into a tense and complicated cross-border standoff that tested the fragile balance between 2 neighboring nations. The chain of events began at the Rio Grande, the river marking the boundary between Mexico and the United States. Around 75 Mexican cowboys, many of them armed, crossed into El Paso. They were searching for two young men, Sanchez and Yorgi, who had gone missing while tracking a herd of cattle reportedly stolen from a ranch on the Mexican side of the river. These cattle belonged to a wealthy Mexican rancher who organized the posse and sent them north to recover both his property and the two missing men. The group arrived in El Paso not as aggressors, but as determined seekers of justice, anxious to find their companions and uncover the truth. El Paso County Constable Gus Kremkow, known for his fluency in Spanish and his ability to act as a cultural bridge between communities, agreed to assist the Mexican party. He led them to a suspected location some miles northwest of town. It was there, near the property of a known local rancher, Johnny Hale, that the bodies of Sanchez and Yorgi were discovered. Hale had a documented history of involvement in questionable cattle dealings, and his name had long been associated with livestock theft. The bodies were brought back to El Paso, and word of the discovery spread quickly, drawing a sizable crowd. Emotions on both sides ran high. The Mexican cowboys had entered the town legally, but were still seen by some locals as an intimidating presence due to their numbers and visible weapons. Many American residents, already uneasy with the town's volatile nature, viewed the situation with concern. Tensions continued to rise, especially as rumors circulated that two American cattlemen, Peveler and Stevenson, had been overheard making boastful remarks about having encountered and possibly harmed the two young Mexicans. The remarks, if true, suggested that the men may have been killed while trying to track the stolen herd to Hale's ranch. The inquest into the deaths was held promptly. Because of the language barrier and the need for transparency, Constable Kremkow was asked to serve as interpreter during the legal proceedings. His role was crucial, as both Mexican and American parties sought a fair understanding of what had occurred. The coroner's jury ruled that the two Mexican cowboys had been unlawfully killed, and as a result, Peveler and Stevenson were formally charged and taken into custody to await trial. With the court proceedings concluded and the suspects detained, the immediate situation appeared to settle. The once tense Mexican delegation, though still mourning their loss, began preparations to return home. The bodies of Sanchez and Yorgi were respectfully taken back across the border to Mexico for burial, accompanied by their companions. Later that same day, April 14, 1881, Constable Gus Kremkow returned to a local saloon to retrieve his personal firearm and rifle, which he had left there earlier. While inside, he became involved in a tense exchange with George Campbell, a former town marshal. Their conversation reportedly centered around remarks Campbell had allegedly made questioning Kremkow's loyalty and role in assisting the Mexican delegation during the earlier inquest. The disagreement quickly drew the attention of John Hale, a local rancher and associate of Campbell. Hale, who had reportedly been drinking heavily throughout the day, grew emotionally agitated. His frustration stemmed from Kremkow's participation in the investigation that had implicated several American ranchers, including Hale himself, in the disappearance of the two young Mexican cowboys. Although Hale was not known to be armed at the time, he was able to obtain one of Campbell's pistols during the confrontation. In a moment of confusion and heightened emotion, he turned the weapon on Kremkow and fired. The sudden discharge startled those nearby and altered the mood of the entire street. At that same moment, Marshal Dallas Stoudenmire was across the way, sitting down for dinner at a restaurant. Hearing the unmistakable sound of gunfire, he quickly rushed out to respond. With little time to assess the situation and under pressure to act swiftly, he opened fire in the direction of the disturbance. In the chaos, a tragic mistake occurred. A bystander, an unarmed Mexican civilian, was fatally struck in the confusion. Stoudenmire then directed his attention to Hale, whose earlier action had escalated the conflict, and quickly brought the situation under control. George Campbell, stunned by Hale's sudden fall and recognizing how badly the situation had deteriorated, reportedly tried to calm things down. However, from Kremkow's perspective, still reeling from the gunshot wound and believing Campbell had been responsible for the attack, he managed to raise his weapon and return fire before losing consciousness. One of Kremkow's shots struck Campbell's firearm, damaging it and injuring Campbell in the process. Another shot hit his foot, further disorienting him. In pain and attempting to recover, Campbell reached for his weapon again, which had fallen to the floor. At this point, Marshal Stoudenmire turned toward Campbell. Unsure of his intentions and with adrenaline running high, the marshal responded with decisive action. Campbell was mortally wounded during the encounter. After the legendary gunfight, the events of April 14, 1881, brought Dallas Stoudenmire instant fame. His quick response during the 4 dead in 5 seconds shootout turned him into a legendary figure nearly overnight. Newspapers and word-of-mouth accounts amplified his reputation as a formidable and fearless lawman. But in El Paso, admiration was far from unanimous. While his image as a strong enforcer of the law grew, Stoudenmire had very few personal allies in the town. In contrast, both John Hale and George Campbell had long established local connections and supporters. This created an atmosphere of resentment toward Stoudenmire, especially among those who felt the shootings, justified or not, had cost them friends and neighbors. In the Old West, legality often took a back seat to personal loyalties and local alliances. Even when a shooting was ruled lawful, the surviving parties frequently had to live with the threat of retribution. Vendettas were a common response, and Stoudenmire quickly found himself at the center of one. Just 3 days after the saloon incident, on April 17, 1881, tensions escalated further. James Manning, part of the influential Manning family and a friend to both Hale and Campbell, reportedly persuaded former Deputy Marshal Bill Johnson to take action against Stoudenmire. Johnson had held a personal grudge ever since Stoudenmire had publicly embarrassed him upon assuming the role of marshal. That night, Johnson, reportedly under the influence of alcohol, waited near a stack of bricks with a double-barreled shotgun. He intended to ambush Stoudenmire as he walked by with his brother-in-law, Stanley "Doc" Cummings. However, the plan went awry. As Johnson tried to steady himself, he lost balance and accidentally discharged both barrels into the air. Stoudenmire reacted quickly to the threat. According to contemporary reports, he returned fire and Johnson was mortally wounded. The failed ambush marked the beginning of a long-standing feud between Stoudenmire and the Manning family, one that would shape his final months in El Paso. Within his first week as marshal, Stoudenmire had been involved in 4 deadly encounters, including one that resulted in the accidental death of an innocent bystander. Over the following months from April 1881 through early 1882, he would be involved in additional armed confrontations during attempted arrests. These incidents, while controversial, did contribute to a sharp decline in El Paso's crime rate. His notoriety as both a capable enforcer and a skilled marksman continued to grow. Yet at the same time, his list of opponents lengthened, particularly among locals who viewed his methods as aggressive or feared his unpredictable presence. Then on February 14, 1882, the conflict turned even more personal. That evening, James Manning became involved in a dispute with Stanley "Doc" Cummings. The two men exchanged words earlier in the night, and the disagreement carried over to a saloon encounter that turned increasingly tense. According to witness accounts, Cummings confronted Manning outside and allegedly made a verbal threat. An innocent passerby happened to walk by, and Cummings, mistaking him for an associate of Manning, briefly detained him. Though he let the bystander go unharmed, the encounter reflected how strained relations had become. Cummings re-entered the saloon, reportedly continuing to express anger toward Manning. Shortly after, Manning appeared in a hallway, armed and ready to confront the situation. A brief exchange followed, and both men opened fire. Cummings was struck during the encounter and, according to observers, collapsed just outside the building. He died shortly after. Though Manning claimed self-defense, the incident further deepened the feud between him and Stoudenmire, who was devastated by the death of his brother-in-law. The fatal confrontation added fuel to an already simmering conflict, one that would not be resolved peacefully. James Manning was acquitted of the charges in a trial that drew a significant crowd, many of whom were friends or allies of the Manning family. The verdict deeply frustrated Dallas Stoudenmire, who believed that justice had not been served. To make matters worse, the one person who had often been able to calm or guide him, his brother-in-law Stanley "Doc" Cummings, was now gone. Following the trial, Stoudenmire began openly expressing his dissatisfaction with the outcome and publicly confronting individuals he believed were responsible for the acquittal. His anger, while understandable from a personal perspective, created an air of tension throughout El Paso. Many residents avoided town altogether, particularly its saloons and public spaces, out of concern they might cross paths with a visibly unsettled Stoudenmire. Although widely recognized for his skills in law enforcement and his ability to de-escalate crime, Stoudenmire remained a relative outsider in El Paso society. He was held in high regard by Texas Rangers and U.S. Marshals alike, but among local citizens and political leaders, his position was more fragile. Unlike the Manning family, who had lived in El Paso for years and cultivated a wide network of friends and allies in both the community and city government, Stoudenmire had few personal connections. Aside from his wife and the now deceased Cummings, he had no family ties in the region. His outsider status, combined with his intense demeanor, left him politically vulnerable. Despite these challenges, Stoudenmire could still claim two major accomplishments. First, under his leadership, the city's rate of violent crime had dropped more sharply than under any of his predecessors. Second, he was widely regarded as a figure who inspired caution, if not fear, ensuring that most people thought twice before disturbing the peace. However, his increasingly strained relationship with city officials came to a head on May 27, 1882, when the town council announced its decision to remove him from his position as marshal. According to eyewitness reports, Stoudenmire entered the council chamber visibly under the influence of alcohol. Frustrated and emotional, he challenged the council's authority in dramatic fashion and made it clear he had no intention of giving up his post easily. Council members tried to defuse the situation by suggesting he could keep his job. But once sober and in a calmer state of mind, Stoudenmire reconsidered. On May 29, 1882, he submitted his resignation voluntarily. Shortly after leaving his post, he took over the Globe Restaurant, an establishment that had previously been run by his late brother-in-law, Cummings. This marked a brief return to civilian life. Yet he did not remain idle for long. Recognizing his skill set and frontier experience, U.S. Marshal Harrington Lee Hal Gosling appointed Stoudenmire as Deputy U.S. Marshal for Western Texas and the New Mexico Territory. This new role allowed him to continue his work in law enforcement on a broader scale. Though his legacy in El Paso remained complex and divisive, U.S. Marshal in Death in Shootout. For a brief time, Dallas Stoudenmire served capably as a Deputy U.S. Marshal, continuing his work in law enforcement across Western Texas and the New Mexico Territory. But despite his new role, the long-standing tensions between him and the Manning family had not been put to rest. The Mannings, George Doc Manning, who would live until 1925, James Manning, died 1915, and Frank Manning, died 1925, were cautious in how they dealt with Stoudenmire. Though they resented him deeply, they were well aware of his experience and quick reflexes, which had been proven time and again. As a result, they avoided confronting him directly unless they were together or had the advantage. On one occasion, a visibly intoxicated Stoudenmire stood in the street outside a saloon where the Mannings had gathered. He reportedly shouted provocations and challenged them to face him in public. The Mannings stayed inside while local townspeople encouraged Stoudenmire to walk away and let the matter drop. After some time, he left the scene, still hurling insults as he disappeared into the night. By mid-September 1882, efforts were made to finally bring the feud to an end. On September 18th, the Mannings and Stoudenmire met in a local saloon to attempt a peace agreement. James Manning, under the impression that the meeting had gone well, excused himself and left early. The remaining conversation, however, quickly turned tense. Stoudenmire began by accusing someone, possibly one of the Mannings, of spreading falsehoods about him. Doc Manning responded by accusing Stoudenmire of breaking a promise. The exchange escalated as emotions flared, and soon both men were visibly agitated. At that point, both men reached for their weapons. In the struggle that followed, a friend of Stoudenmire attempted to intervene by stepping between them, which caused Stoudenmire to stumble. Doc Manning fired, and one shot struck Stoudenmire in the left arm. A second shot made limited contact, cushioned by folded documents in Stoudenmire's shirt pocket, but the impact caused him to fall near the doorway. As he went down, Stoudenmire managed to draw a pistol with his right hand and return fire. wounding Doc Manning in the arm. It was then that James Manning, having returned to the scene, approached from behind. In the confusion, he discharged 2 rounds. One struck a nearby barber's pole, while the other fatally wounded Stoudenmire. In the aftermath of the altercation, emotions ran high. Doc Manning, still recovering from the encounter, reportedly acted out physically toward Stoudenmire's body before being restrained by his brother. Stoudenmire's funeral was held with honor by the members of El Paso Lodge number 130 of the ancient Free and Accepted Masons. His wife, Isabella, later arranged for his remains to be transported to Columbus, Texas. The Masonic Lodge paid all funeral expenses. He was laid to rest in Allerton Cemetery, located in Colorado County. The Mannings were arrested and stood trial for the killing. However, as had occurred previously, the jury included many of their friends and supporters. They were ultimately acquitted, and the legal consequences they faced were minimal. Life in El Paso returned to normal, and before long, the memory of Stoudenmire's dramatic final days began to fade from public discussion. In a curious turn of events, Frank Manning was later appointed as assistant city marshal after Thomas Mode was killed while investigating a disturbance at a local establishment on July 11, 1883. However, Frank's time in the position was brief. His reluctance to take action against friends and personal acquaintances led to criticism, and he eventually stepped away from the role. In the lawless streets of El Paso, Dallas Stoudenmire made his name in just 5 seconds. But his legend has echoed for over a century. He was fast, fearless, and ultimately a tragic figure in a town that never truly accepted him. His story is a vivid reminder that in the Old West, justice was often quick, reputations were fragile, and survival meant more than just skill with a gun. If you found this tale as riveting as a 6-shooter showdown at high noon, don't write off just yet. Subscribe to our channel for more legendary stories, forgotten outlaws, and untamed truths from the Wild West. Saddle up. We've got a lot more history to uncover.